Welcome to our Rewind the Ages YouTube channel. You know, we often think of history as this nice, straight line, a simple journey from one point to the next. But what if it isn't? What if it's actually a story full of incredible moments of brilliance that are then followed by long periods of loss, of just forgetting? Every so often, we dig up artifacts that seem absolutely impossible for their time, things that challenge everything we thought we knew. But even among all these mysteries, one discovery really stands out. Not because it's big or flashy, but because of what it suggests. It's a small clay pot found near Baghdad, an object some believe may have generated electricity almost 2,000 years ago. This is the story of the Baghdad Battery, and it forces us to ask, did ancient minds stumble upon a technology that was literally ages ahead of its time? So let's get right into it. This is a discovery that just doesn't sit right. It's an artifact that completely disrupts our neat and tidy timeline of how technology is supposed to develop. Right? We all learn it in school. Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age. It all marches forward so predictably. But then, bam, something turns up that just doesn't belong. In this case, it was a little clay jar sitting on a dusty shelf in a museum in Iraq, just waiting to start a massive debate. Was it just a simple storage container? Or was it something that sounds like science fiction, an actual power cell built nearly 2 millennia before the age of electricity? Okay, so picture this. It's 1938. A German archaeologist named Wilhelm König, who's the director of the Iraq National Museum, is sifting through a bunch of unclassified stuff dug up from a site near Baghdad. And in that pile, one particular item catches his eye. So what made this little pot special? Well, it wasn't what it looked like on the outside. It was what was going on inside. Let's break this thing down, piece by piece, like a forensic investigation. So what we're looking at here isn't just a random jumble of parts. No way. Inside this little clay jar, there was a perfectly rolled sheet of copper. And suspended right in the middle of that copper cylinder, never touching it, was an iron rod, all rusted out. And the whole thing was capped off with a seal of bitumen, which is basically asphalt, keeping everything inside perfectly insulated. And Koenig saw it immediately. He wrote in his paper that this setup it couldn't be an accident. The way these two different metals were deliberately placed, so carefully insulated from each other, it screamed function, not storage. And that's when he proposed something absolutely radical, that this thing was a galvanic cell. In other words, a battery. And this, right here, is the absolute heart of the mystery, the battery hypothesis. Is it possible? Could this ancient little jar actually generate electricity? Okay, quick science lesson. I promise it's simple. For any battery to work, you basically need 3 things. You need 2 different types of metal, an anode and a cathode. And you need some kind of conductive liquid, an electrolyte, that lets tiny charged particles move between them. That movement is your electric current. So how would you turn this thing on? Well, it's shockingly simple. You've got your iron rod and your copper cylinder. All you'd have to do is pour in a mild acid, something like vinegar or grape juice, which they had plenty of back then. That acid would start a chemical reaction with the iron, releasing electrons, which would then flow over to the copper. And boom, you've got an electrical current. And get this isn't just a wild theory. After World War II, a bunch of different researchers built their own working replicas. And when they filled them with stuff like vinegar, they actually worked. They produced a real, measurable electric current, somewhere between 0.5 volt and 2 volts. The conclusion was kind of undeniable. The object could have been a battery. But see, that incredible fact just opens up an even bigger, way more difficult question. If ancient people really had electricity, what in the world were they using it for? And here's the real head-scratcher. It's one thing to have a power source. It's another thing to have something to power with it. When archaeologists look, there's a complete blank. No ancient light bulbs, no tiny motors. We can't even find a single scrap of wire. So, if it wasn't for lighting up a room or making something spin, what else could it be for? Well, researchers have come up with 3 main theories for how you might use a tiny bit of electricity like this. First up, the theory that Koenig himself liked, electroplating. The idea is you could use that small current to put a super thin layer of gold onto a silver object. The problem? Well, archaeologists know how they gilded things back then, using mercury, and we've never found a single artifact that was definitely electroplated. Then there's idea number 2, medical therapy. Maybe they used it to give tiny shocks to help with pain, kind of like how the ancient Greeks used electric eels. It's plausible, but again, zero hard evidence. And that brings us to the third theory, and this is the one that really gets you thinking. Ritual use. Imagine a priest hooking this up to a metal statue in a temple. A believer touches it and feels a strange tingle, the touch of a god. It's a way to use a little bit of science to create a whole lot of faith. Okay, but hold on. Before we get too carried away with ancient electricity, any good investigation has to look at the other side of the argument. So let's talk about the case for skepticism, because there is a very compelling alternative. For a lot of archaeologists, the real answer is way simpler and, frankly, less exciting. They point out that very similar pots have been found nearby, and some of those had the rotted remains of parchment scrolls inside. This is the scroll jar hypothesis, and it actually explains all the same evidence. You wrap a sacred scroll around an iron rod, slide it into a protective copper tube, and seal the whole thing with bitumen to keep it dry. Over hundreds of years, the scroll rots away, creating acidic gunk that corrodes the metals, and it would look exactly like the artifact we found. But here's the real kicker, the one argument that's really tough to get around. To use electricity for anything, plating, medicine, a zappy statue, you need wires. You need a way to get the current from the jar to the thing you're using. And not a single wire, not one conductive lead of any kind has ever been found with these jars. For many, that's the fatal flaw in the whole battery theory. So in the end, we're left with this moment of possible genius, completely without context. No matter what it really was, it's an object that just leaves us with way more questions than it does answers. It's kind of like one of those ink blot tests, you know? What you see in the Baghdad Battery really depends on who you are. If you're an engineer, you look at its design and it just screams power cell. But if you're an archaeologist, you see a really well-made, practical container for protecting something sacred. Just stop and think about the implications for a second. If it really was a battery, it means some ancient society was tinkering with electrochemistry almost 1,800 years before Alessandro Volta invented the modern battery. And somehow, that incredible knowledge just vanished. It disappeared, leaving absolutely no technological revolution behind. And maybe that's what's truly unsettling about the Baghdad Battery. It's not just about whether it could make a spark. It's the final nagging question it forces us to confront. Just how easily can knowledge be lost? How quickly can a moment of brilliance disappear without leaving so much as a shadow behind?